Brian Hamilton, thank you so much for having me back in your podcast loop. I have loved being interviewed by you. I think it was 7 times, if I'm not mistaken. So here we are back together. I want to share with you a really powerful opportunity to boost resiliency in organizations. And that is the Nurses Week Resiliency Reboot. Now, I know that you're all security experts, so you may be thinking, why are we talking about Nurses Week? Well, 2 reasons. Number 1, so many of you know the value of celebrating milestones. So I hope you will help me spread the word that there is this really powerful, done for you Nurses Week celebration. It's got the education with an amazing speaking colleague of mine, Stephanie Staples, a rewired nurse, resiliency expert. We've joined forces. I'm a recognition expert. We're going to make sure nurses feel valued, supported, and have so many tools to feel more resourceful in this challenging time. So please spread the word. The other reason I want to mention it is that this doesn't have to be just for nurses. All of your security professionals and the other departments you work with, why not make this one huge connective experience? Hospitals and facilities across North America, perhaps even across the world, could all benefit from a boost of resiliency. Would you not agree? And if we do it together, and if we take some of the burden off of you as busy leaders, I think we can make this happen really quickly. What do you think? I hope you will check it out. Visit us, learn more about what we're trying to do. Please spread the word. And if nothing else, just remember, Nurses Week is coming up, or the first part of May, varies a little bit country to country. Just please make sure you reach out to as many nurses as possible and say thank you. I appreciate you being on my team.
Be sure to subscribe to the Healthcare Security Cast so you don't miss a single episode. We're on multiple platforms including Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music, and Audible, just about anywhere where you can listen to a podcast. For links to all of these sites, for links to join the Healthcare Security Cast community groups on LinkedIn and Facebook, or if you're interested in being a guest or being a sponsor, you can find all of this through one link. Check out our Linktree at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, B-R-I-N-E, Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. And before we get into the show, I just want to thank our sponsors, 3D Network Technology. Reliability is our core value. Visit 3dnetworktechnology.com. And Genetec, delivering security strategies for healthcare. Visit Genetec, that's Genetec.com. And also the Change Execution Group and 360 Life Transformations. Visit 360lifetransformations.com.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast, the podcast dedicated to healthcare security, safety, and emergency management. If you are involved with a healthcare security program or desire to be, this podcast is for you. Join the conversation as we discuss the issues that matter to healthcare security professionals while leveraging the expertise of healthcare security thought leaders and experts in personal development. And now, here's your host, Brian Hamilton.
Welcome to the Healthcare Security Cast for Thursday, March the 18th. I'm joined today by Amie, Varley, and Sara Fung. Ladies, thanks for joining me tonight.
Thank you for having
us.
Awesome. Yeah, glad you were able to make the time. It's funny. I was joking around with my wife because you guys have been so busy lately. I was saying, you know, we booked this a long time ago. I'm glad I kind of caught you two on the way up before you were
so funny.
before you guys were out of reach as a guest. So I guess the first thing I want to ask, and really just to get to know you a little bit, who are Amie, Varley, and Sara Fung?
All right. We combined are the Gritty Nurse podcast, but individually, Amie Varley, I would say Amie Varley is a mom first, a caregiver second, and a hard, passionate advocate. And I don't even want to say that's third, because that's kind of something that I think we, like I said today, we eat it, we live it, we breathe it. That's the work that we continue to do. So we advocate about health equity, women's rights, mental health, and also our profession of nursing, because one of the things that we say, like, you know, we're a part of this pandemic. We're a part of the work that happens in healthcare too, but we aren't heard from very frequently. And me and Sarah are here to change that up.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that was a really good intro, Amie. How do I top that? Uh, I'm just kidding. Just like Amie, I'm also a mom. So I'm a mom of 2 kids. They are 3 and almost 6. I am a nurse. I've been a nurse for over 10 years now. And also like Amie, I'm a strong advocate for things that I really believe in, such as health equity, women's rights, diversity, and mental health. Those are the 4 things that we stand for. Although we do generally like to advocate for anyone that doesn't have a voice. So a lot of the things are just issues, that have been sort of ongoing in healthcare, hot topics that people talk about a little bit, but they don't really take that deep dive from a nursing perspective. So I think that's kind of what we bring to the table. And like Amie said, there's a huge impetus of silencing in nursing, especially it being a woman-dominated profession. So we kind of want to change that. We want to break stereotypes. We want to show people that nurses are more than what you see in the media, being that sexy nurse or that nurse ratchet. So we want to show people that nurses are very diverse and, there's many things that we can do.
Absolutely. And just to kind of add to that, the one thing that you missed, Amie, was barber. So that's another thing to add to that list.
All right.
Now, in terms of the podcast, so that was the next thing I wanted to ask you about. Like, I've had a chance to listen to the Gritty Nurse podcast, and being someone who spent a lot of time working in the healthcare environment, I really enjoy it. But can you tell us exactly what the Gritty Nurse podcast is, and what was the inspiration to start it?
First of all, the story of Amie and I is that we are former coworkers, and we have worked together twice in 2 different positions at 2 different organizations. And throughout our careers, we have experienced a lot of bullying and sort of incivility, and we really felt silence because when this happened, we didn't know where to go. We didn't know who to talk to. And Amie had sort of suggested at one point, why don't we do a podcast? But I didn't know anything about it. I mean, Amie knew a little more than I did, but it was just like, we just need to get our voices out there and we need to talk about these things that we experience. And for me, it was actually therapy, just to talk into the void and know that people, were listening and sort of getting some value out of our experiences. And so that for me is how it got started. But it has really, I don't think we even knew where we would be a year from when we started. And it sort of has snowballed. Like, we had no idea what we were getting into. And it's become sort of weird because even Brian, when you say that you're listening to our podcast, it's a really weird feeling to me that people are listening and actually paying attention and talking about us in nursing school. They're talking about us in the media. Like, it's just surreal to me, I guess. And that's the thing about podcasting, is that you can really connect with people on a deeper level. And I think that people really appreciate that relationship that we have with each other and the stories that we have. So we're really big on storytelling. That's another aspect to our podcast.
Yeah, and just kind of piggybacking off of what Sarah was saying, like, I think the most important point for us and really what we want to get at is making sure not just our voices were heard, but the voices of other people were heard, and that we were able to bring various different stories to light. So yeah, we talk about healthcare, we talk about advocacy, we talk about mental health, we talk about a lot of these different types of issues, and we also talk about social justice. And it's one thing for us to elevate ourselves, but we thought it was more important to elevate the voices of others. And we said, how can we actually do this? And I think our experiences kind of propelled us to say, you know what? We have to do this. We can't wait for someone else to do the speaking. We can't wait for that change to come. If we want the change, we've got to be the change. So we started saying, hey, you know what? We're gonna start speaking into the air. We don't care who's listening. We're gonna tell our truths and we're gonna share other people's truths. And I think it resounded with people. People connected with it. And I think we're going to keep going. I think as long as we can continue to advocate and lift other people up, I think that's our main goal. And also to spread awareness and empower other people to make change.
Awesome. Now, you're a little bit more than a year into the podcast. And I'm just curious, to this point, do you have a favorite episode?
Oh, well, you mean since the last time we've spoke, oh my goodness, there's been so many really fiery episodes, but I have to be honest, I guess if we're looking at the new year and we're just talking about sheer entertainment, because it was as opposed to content, I really enjoyed our recent episode recording with Q the nurse. He reminds me very much of Bill Burr. So I don't know if any of your guests listening listen to comedy or any of that kind of stuff, but just his cadence, the energy he brought, because I think it was something that we needed. Like we've been talking about a lot of heavy topic. And I think just having him on and having that refreshing perspective, we say laughter is medicine. And I think for me, from a mental health standpoint, it was very helpful. So that's what I'd say for now.
Yeah, I'd say the same thing. There are certain people that when you think of them, you automatically start smiling and you start laughing. And he is one of those. I would say he's probably in my top 5 people that I just love. I've never met him in person, but I just love his energy. I love his charisma. I love his attitude. And even preparing to record with Q the nurse, there was no preparation. We're like, hey, Q, you want to be on our episode? Yeah. What time? Okay, I'll be there. So, I mean, like, he's a podcaster. We didn't have to prepare him. I knew it would kind of just be off the cuff. He's that kind of person. And I think he really brought a lot of insight into what it is to be a travel nurse, which is something that Amie and I have never done. But aside from that, if I had to pick another episode, I would say the one that we did with Linda Silas, she's the president of the Canadian Federation of Nurses, and she's very outspoken in a good and funny way as well. So she had a lot of opinions about Ontario's rollout of PPE and different issues that have affected nurses. And she's very straightforward, and I like that about people. And I think she says things in a way that resonate with a lot of our audience. So that's probably my second favorite episode.
I said I've listened to a lot of them. I really enjoyed the gross stories from the hospital environment because it just brought me back to the experience. Yeah, I had to admit though, when there was one part where I had to stop and finish listening to it after because it just got a little bit much for me at the time. But I finished out the episode. I enjoyed it.
Oh my gosh.
Too gross for you.
I mean, I think some people say like, we push boundaries and we push limits and I think that episode for sure, we talked about some pretty disgusting stuff that we've seen and we've heard. But I mean, that's healthcare. That's the life that we live as a nurse. That's our experience. And, for us, we can laugh it off. It's like we talk about it at our dinner conversations, right? Like that's just the way we are. But I mean, for some other people to hear that, it's like, oh no, that was awful. So we get it though. We get it.
And I won't say it definitely wasn't too gross for me. There was just one part that I was listening to closer to the end as a man. When I heard it, I was like, oh, I know what part. So yeah, for any
when you're talking about it.
Yeah, anybody listening, I'm not going to spoil it. You have to go listen to it, but it's definitely a great episode.
Thank you.
Very welcome. But now, so for today, what we wanted to talk about is the impacts of violence in nursing and really providing the nursing and security perspective. Because again, nursing and security, especially certain departments like, the ED, for example, or behavioral and mental health units, there's a lot of collaboration there. Now, workplace violence is something that professionals in healthcare face, on a regular basis, definitely more than, should be expected. Can you share your insights on workplace violence as it relates specifically to nurses?
Oh dear. Yeah, let me kind of start here and talk about some of the things that I've seen. One of the first things I'd like to say is workplace violence is not a part of the job. Like, I mean, I know a lot of people say, you get into healthcare, that's something that you just have to deal with. Violence is actually not a part of the job. And there's actually a lot of evidence and a lot of different things that point to how we need to be better protected in our workplaces. And there's actually some really startling stats. And I'm going to just kind of pull some things from the Canadian Federation of Nurses Unions that have actually done some work, some background work on this. And there was a national study that was done that they found that over 61% of nurses reported a serious problem with violence over a recent 12-month period, and that 2/3 considered leaving their jobs as a result. There's a large number of violence-related lost time claims related to healthcare workers, and it actually increased by almost 66% over a 9-year period. So that's 3 times the rate of an increase for police and correctional services combined. So we're talking about some really staggering types of data in terms of some of the stuff that we day to day have to face. Like, I mean, there's another data point that I pulled up, and it says physical assault was the traumatic event reported affecting over 92.7% of nurses, and nearly half of nurses, 46.4%, reported exposure to physical assault 11 or more times. Like, how how is this something that, I'm glad we're talking about it today, but how is this something that we're dealing with? Like, how is it that there's not more attention being paid to some of the experiences that nurses and other people in the healthcare profession may have to face in regards to violence?
And just to build on that, I feel like the prevalence of violence is actually a lot more than people realize. And I kind of feel like it speaks to the culture of silencing in nursing. So, as a woman dominated profession, nursing is 91% women in Canada. And I think that most people going into nursing don't realize that it can be a part of the job, although it shouldn't be. And when you're in that sort of environment, there's a lot of nurses that feel disempowered. So even though violence, there's a violent incident, they feel like there is nothing they can do. They accept it as part of the job. They feel like it's a hazard that they just need to figure out. But that's not the case. Like, there are a lot of things that we can do about it. And it's not just violence from patients, it's violence from family members. And we're not even just talking about physical violence, it's verbal abuse. Like, that is actually quite common in healthcare. And when you have a culture of nurses that aren't cohesive and they feel disempowered and they have no voice, that is how it gets perpetuated. And I mean, like, there are units that are definitely more prone to violence, but it's not something that you can be free of just because you're in a certain unit. Like, it's everywhere.
Yeah.
No, absolutely. And actually, that's a good segue to the next thing I wanted to talk about, and that's just the overall acceptance of violence as a part of the job in healthcare. Now, I've had the experience working as a frontline security officer where I've responded to a call, I've responded to a code white, and there's been times where I get there and I'm annoyed because I'm thinking, like, this isn't a code white. Why did you call me for this? Or why didn't you just call in a patient assist, whatever? And then there's other times where, I'm responding to a call in, say, one of these more volatile areas like the ED or mental health, and I'm saying to the nurse after, like, why didn't you call a code white? Like, what's happening here? So some people who are seeing it more become more comfortable with it. And I think it's hard to quantify the data because I feel like there is a problem with underreporting. And I think part of the reason why we've seen a spike in the numbers are people are starting to get more comfortable with reporting incidents. But what are your thoughts on just the idea of the underreporting?
Oh, I could tell you it's definitely underreported. Like, I mean, just in my own experience, like, I mean, I worked at one of the busiest EDs in all of Ontario, in all of Canada. And I think Sarah can speak to this too. The number of code whites we heard being called was incredible. And I could tell you, they're like, even reading through some, like, as an educator, sometimes we had the opportunity to kind of read over some code white data and look at some information, and just some of the things that we saw where people might have security for or might have not called security for. It was like mind boggling, right? You're just like, oh, they called because, this person called them a bad name. But then, when the patient was lifting a pole to them and swinging it around, they called for just a security assist, or they waited till the pole actually hit them. And that they're like, oh yeah, now we need to call a code white. And we're like, what is going on? And I could tell you, I know deep down, there's also a lot of fear, right? So it's just kind of like nurses feel like we can handle everything. Like, we can take on whatever role, like we can handle it. We don't need that extra help. But we do need the help, and we need to recognize when we need to be calling in the extra support. Look, I'm telling you, and I think we had this conversation. I'm not going to let someone hit me. I'm just not like, I mean, I'm not about that life. If I have to duck, dodge, whatever the case may be, I'm not going to get to the point where someone is going to hit me. And I think this is where the training is so important, and the partnering in the training is important. So if I'm learning about, violent types of behavior or de-escalation, I need to be learning that with security, because I think sometimes there's that disconnect. So I'm going to learn one thing over here in my nursing bubble, and security is going to learn something over here in their security world. But the collaboration isn't the greatest, because there's times where, like, for example, you said you're called, you're like, why am I here? Or you're called, you're like, oh my God, this might have actually been like a different, maybe this is a code silver. Like, this is a completely different situation. And I really feel like the work has to happen together. We need to collaborate in terms of the education and the training. So when we're calling for a code white or a situation like that, we all know what our roles are. So this is my role as I'm coming into it, or this is the security's role. This is how they're going to help me. Because I'm sure there's times where we should be calling the police rather than security. Like, yes, security is coming, but we need to be calling in for more reinforcement or greater support at that time.
And just to build on what you're saying, Amie, I think there's also this culture of what we call normalization of the deviance, right? So you are very
Mhm.
accustomed to what you're used to seeing. So if you're used to seeing no violence, then the minute that, a patient or a family member raises their hand, you're calling a code white. If you're working in the
Yes.
emergency department or mental health, that is a totally different story. Like if you actually called a code white for every situation that might turn violent, you'd be calling like 20 times per shift. So I think
Mhm.
it's really just about, I guess, like going back to what you're saying, is defining what people's roles are. What is a code white? What constitutes calling a code white? And I also think that interprofessional collaboration is really important. But from a healthcare perspective, I think people sometimes forget about groups that are not necessarily healthcare professionals. So they're thinking like, oh,
I
nurses,
agree.
doctors, RTs, social workers, and they kind of forget about all the support staff that actually could make a difference, like dietary, like environmental services, like security. They're part of the team as well. Just because they're not quote unquote regulated healthcare professionals, it doesn't mean that they can't bring something to the table. I think it's very much about that. And if I think back to all of my different hospital orientations, I don't recall security being very much a part of it. So I think that's another thing that really could be, it could just help a lot more with understanding what security does.
Absolutely.
Absolutely. You touched on a couple great points there. I'll circle back and just touch on the orientation piece. That was the one thing I can say I was very happy about. At the facilities I worked at, security was involved in the orientation. So I remember, again, being the first hospital I worked at, being a brand new employee. I was at the orientation, and I remember my director coming in and doing his presentation. So all those new staff were getting introduced to security. And then the other thing that you brought up, Amie, was the collaborative training. So the one thing I did, it took me a long time to get to this point, but I actually ended up getting certified to be an instructor in our conflict management training. So it was great because it's training that had to happen across the organization. Every employee had to do it. So I had a great opportunity, very unique opportunity, to interact with all the nurses, every single person that was coming in. And there was so much value in it because now I got to see other people's perspective. So then
Right, right.
when we're dealing with those situations in real
Hmm.
life, now I understand why you as a nurse are thinking a certain way, or you take certain action that maybe before I had actually had that experience, I was like, what are they doing? Because again, we come at it from a totally different angle than nursing staff do in many cases.
Yeah, and I mean, like, if I think about the type of training that nurses have when it comes to de-escalation, like I know they have GPA, so gentle persuasion approach, or CPI, so crisis intervention training, but I don't know if those things are alone in themselves are adequate. I mean, I think if you are intervening early, I think that's also a really key point in terms of that de-escalation, recognizing the signs that, stuff is getting out of control and you need that additional support. But I know that this is an unrealistic thing, and I think this is also just coming from like a woman-dominated profession where women tend, if they are dealing with a situation where there is violence, we tend to, I don't want to say shy away from it, but there's that sense where, like, you're so fearful that you kind of ball up and you do nothing. So like, even reading about some of the cases that I have, like, I know there's a lot of fear of like, how do we manage someone who might be coming after you? Or, we don't, in nursing, we don't train how to, like, safely take a patient down to the ground or any of those types of things. And of course, this is now like my jujitsu brain coming on. And I could tell you, it's actually really helped me with understanding kind of like my body in the environment, and giving me a little bit more confidence to, if I was ever in a situation where, it was to turn violent, I would be actually able to take someone safely down to the ground without hurting them. Because that's the other real important component. A patient who's mentally ill, who or might be on substances or whatever the case may be, or even just an angry parent or whatever the case may be, if it turns into a violent situation, I don't think our end goal is to cause harm to the patient either, right? And sometimes that does occur. But again, that's why I think it's so important to make sure that we are training people and equipping people with the right tools to make sure that, one, they're keeping the patients and families safe. And then again, we're making sure that the nurses, the security staff, everyone else who's a part of the care team is kept safe. And again, I'll say this again, like, I think jujitsu is something that I think all women should be able to train and know, because again, it's an art of, it's not about the size of the person, but about what you can do with your body in the space and making sure that you're safe while doing it. And I could tell you it's definitely changed my confidence if I was ever to have a situation where I was put into a situation where someone was being violent towards me, that I'd be able to take them down safely without hurting myself or hurting the other person. But I think we have to have some form of a balance where we're making sure we're safe and we're not harming the patient as well. Because I've seen that angle as well, and it's not a good look.
Absolutely. Now, the other thing that's kind of that I've seen come positive from these joint collaborations, these joint training efforts, are other staff having understanding of how security approaches things. Because I've seen situations as well where, you know, security takes action because of the, you know, the degree of what's going on, and then they're getting questioned afterwards. You know, you have this debrief, and it's like, well, did you try to de-escalate? Did you try to do this? And I'm like, well, no, we didn't try to de-escalate, because when we walked in, the individual was throwing punches at your staff, so we
Right.
didn't, it wasn't the appropriate time to de-escalate. Right? So you know, I remember there's one specific incident that sticks out to me, and you know, I obviously I'm not going to name the facility that it happened at, but it was in one of the behavioral health units. We were responding because this individual was just not following the directions. They were refusing to take their medication, and they were getting very aggressive towards the staff. So, you know, as we go in the door, this guy attempted to kick one of my colleagues in the groin, and he just had taken enough of a step back that it hit him in his upper thigh. If you watch wrestling, I basically Goldberg speared him to the ground.
Oh God, yes, I know. Yeah.
Did it without hurting him, mind you, but you know,
Right.
quickly ended the threat. He was restrained and medicated. It didn't get called into question, but that's one of those situations where, you know, I've seen that, where really the actions that were taken weren't necessarily incorrect. They may not have been
Right.
what somebody wants to see on the outside, but people understanding
right.
like why you're doing what you're doing, I think, is important as well.
I know that there's this huge fear of, especially with nurses, and even speaking to some nurses who have been really seriously hurt by patients, that there's this fear of, like, you know, if I put my hands on the patient, I'm going to be sued or whatever the case may be. And I was kind of like, well, I have to be honest, and maybe this is like just my own training. If it's like at the end of the day, I need to make sure I'm going to keep myself safe. And I'm not saying that like I think people should hit patients. I think that's crazy. That's not what I'm saying. But I think that you can't just curl up into a ball and just let it happen to you. You have to whatever you can do to make sure that you're keeping yourself safe and that you're not actually just being completely brutalized. I think we need to have a better dialogue and a better conversation, because we've seen some really horrible things. And I think Southlake is one of the biggest examples that we've seen of some of the crazy things that can happen. And I think we need to continue having these conversations, and we need to empower nurses to be able to have an understanding that there's more that they can do as opposed to just kind of like sitting back and doing absolutely nothing.
Right. And I think if someone is physically attacking you, then you have the right to defend yourself. So we've talked about this in a previous episode where that is allowed. I mean, you are a person. I mean, you're a nurse, but you are also a person, and you deserve to be able to protect yourself and call in help as needed. And just to go back to the role of security, I think a lot of nurses and healthcare professionals view security as de facto police, because
Yes.
a violent situation has happened. I think we've all been through this. A violent situation has happened. We call security, they show up, and we're like, peace out, we're done. Security's
Yeah,
here.
we're just like, bye.
We're bye. We're gonna go chart now. We're gonna chart the whole incident and just leave them. And then you guys are like, there was no handover. We don't really know what's happening. Like we've de-escalated the situation, but what do you want us to do now? Like we're not. What do you want us to do? I just don't know that everyone has that understanding of what security is there for. And maybe I don't either, but I know that security guards are not policemen. That much I do know. And I think that role clarity, I think, would help if people really understood what your role was, where it begins and where it ends.
I agree, Sarah.
Right. And you know, it's funny because even in terms of police, like if you have police show up at a hospital, and there still needs to be a handover. You can't just say, okay, good, the police are here, and go back to your other patients. Right. But no, I definitely had that happen when I was doing security. I'd respond to a call, and sometimes I would hear the nurses say, okay, good, security's here. And they'd go running off, and I have to stop them. Like, no, hold on. What is going on? What do you need me to do? Why did you call me here? Because again, yeah, there is a bit of an education gap I think, where
we're just like, phew,
yeah,
bye.
yeah, yeah.
Above our pay grade, we're done.
But yeah, exactly. So there's a bit of I think an education gap as to what security can actually do, and we're basically there as an enabler. We're there to support the treatment that has to happen with that patient. And we still need, when we're coming in, we still need direction from the nursing staff. Like anything that we're doing that's involving a patient, then yes, we are going to need some guidance there from the nursing staff. Now, it's a different story, and again, depends on policies. Every organization's different. But say, for example, it's a visitor, then yeah, you can basically do okay, this is what happened. Okay, good, security's here. Then in that situation, it's a little bit different. Because we have our own policies that we follow in that instance. But when it's patient related, we definitely need that clinical intervention, and we need to know what is expected of us, and exactly how we're going to support that situation.
For sure, I can tell you, like I have been one of those horrible people that I'm like, this patient is so angry, this mom or this this parent. I'm just like, oh, security's here, peace. And that wasn't okay. That wasn't right of me. But like sometimes it's just like we just didn't know what to do, and we're just like, okay, they must have a better idea. They've got this plan. They know what. And again, that's where that disconnect in terms of the education and the collaboration is, right? So I'm so sorry I did it.
No, it's something, it's not abnormal. And the one thing too, you mentioned, this is above my pay grade. You got to remember, in some of these situations, especially hospitals, a lot of time is one of the areas where they're going to try to save money is on that security program. So there's times where you have a minimum wage security guard responding to this call. And I had the privilege of working for an in-house security program when I first started. So there was we had pretty good retention, and luckily I almost always had somebody who was very experienced with me, especially early on. But that's not always the case.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Like, I think there's got to be a better solution to kind of what we have now. Because I know, like I said, it is underreported in terms of the violence that we see. And I'm sure in terms of the tracking the other way, it's also underreported the harm that actually happens to patients as well. And I mean, I think we do heavily rely so much on security for these situations. And I wish I had the answers to say, hey, you know what, snap my fingers, this is the best way to solve this problem. But I think, again, this is why we have to continue having these conversations and saying, hey, this is a blind spot. we need to figure this out, and we need to talk about it to see some change. And again, like, I think, what was it? Maybe was it about 2-3 months ago, Sarah? We actually received an email from a nurse in the States. And I guess she's going through some type of case because she had a violent attack on her by a patient. And the pictures that she sent us, and she's like, oh, my hospital is now kind of almost absolving themselves of the fact that this had happened. And I'm just like, we don't even know what to do with that, right? We're just kind of like, oh my God, like, you need to seek legal advice.
It was quite gory. Like, you could see that she was bruised and bloodied, and I believe she needed stitches. Like, we're just not equipped to know what to do in this situation. But I think she just felt like she needed to reach out to a fellow nurse to kind of share her story and see if we had ever experienced something similar, which, I mean, thankfully we haven't, but it is way more common than people realize. And I feel like, nurses are so often silenced that they just don't have anywhere else to go. So she came to us.
Yeah. I mean, I think kind of the most recent media event is, like I said, like the whole South Lake, where they kind of just said, like, enough is enough. We need to demand action. And there were actually a lot of nurses that were protesting about kind of some of the things that they've been seeing. And I think that, like, we have to start holding our organizations and our senior leaders more accountable. Like, we can't continue to work in an environment where we are feeling so unsafe, especially, these EDs or some of the mental health units. Like, I would say probably more like, the acute mental health units, but we need a better solution than people being harmed, because, there's loss of pay, there's loss of life and function. Like, I mean, it's not just, you get hurt and you go off the job and you're just like, oh, I'll go back in the next day. Like, this can cause PTSD. If you've been attacked severely, how is it that you can just all of a sudden pick up and go and do your shift? You can't. Like, I mean, we have to have better measures and structures around providing safety to nurses and other people a part of the healthcare team, and security too. Like, I mean, some of the stuff that I see that you guys have to deal with, I'm just like, whew, I don't know, man. Like, I don't know if that's okay either. But if we don't talk about it and we don't start bringing the conversation to the forefront so other people can say, hey, you know, there's a problem here, we're not going to see anything changed.
Yeah, and I'll agree. From the security perspective, I think we end up being kind of the stopgap. So when, you know, you run out, when other people run out of options and they don't know what to do, it tends to fall on security because, you know, as a last resort, okay, we don't know what to do with this. You know, we need you guys to deal with this. And there's so many situations. Like for me, it was great learning because I really had to, you know, figure out how to navigate some very dynamic situations very quickly.
Yeah.
It tends to kind of go that way. Now, I guess I'm curious what your thoughts are from a nursing perspective, but I feel like from a security perspective, there's the one thing that I would really like to see, and, you know, I have ideas around it, but I think for security staff, there needs to be a baseline level of training that is mandatory if you're working in a healthcare facility. And you know, obviously,
Absolutely.
some facilities I think need to build on that, but I think there needs to be a baseline training that's just not happening right now across the board. That, you know, I think is just a minimum standard coming in. What do you think, you know, in terms of nursing, is there anything that you think needs to be improved upon as you know, nurses are entering the field and ongoing even as they progress through their careers?
Absolutely. I think there's more real world training that is needed from a nursing perspective, because when I think back to what I learned in nursing school, everything that we've talked about in this podcast so far was not covered, at least for me. So I think that there needs to be a balance between theoretical learning and real life learning, right? So whether it's like how to de-escalate a violent situation or how to talk to a family member that is going to sort of become violent, I think that's really important. And I didn't realize actually that security guards didn't have special training for working in healthcare facilities because, like I said, it's just my lack of understanding of the role. But I think for nursing, there is definitely a need for this because violence is on the rise. And I mean, the supports have not kept up with what's happening. So I think that it's definitely something we need to talk about more, and it can't be swept under the rug. There needs to be more clarity, more awareness to the prevalence of violence and what we can do as nurses and what our rights are. And it's not okay to be attacked by a patient and have to look after them the next day. Like there
Oh,
has to
yeah.
be some accountability. Like, I think that is actually quite common. You are looking after a patient, they've attacked you, you've de-escalated the situation, you know, whatever, you go home, now you've come back to the unit, and because of the way assignments work, usually you're assigned to the same patient. So you may very well be assigned to that same patient that attacked you earlier, and you have to navigate this on your own. And is that okay? Like, how do we sort of deal with that situation? I don't really know what the answer is, but I think it's worth talking about and sort of figuring out what some policies or decision making should be around something like that.
Yeah, again, I think this is where we need to be a little bit more innovative in terms of even just like our baseline education. So like at the baccalaureate level, bachelor's degree level, that, you know, maybe we actually have a security officer coming in talking about dealing with a violent patient, or we actually, you know, we actually have that formalized training right built into our nursing programs to say, you know what, if this situation happens, this is how you can deal with it. Why do we need to get de-escalation training on the job? Like, I don't think we should wait till there's like a crisis situation and now we're actually learning about it, or we're learning about it, you know, for the first time joining an organization, and we have, you know, like one day where we have a couple slides shown to us and now we're supposed to be experts. Like, I think that's crazy. So I really think that this is where, like I said, we need to be a little bit more innovative. We can start learning about these things early on. And this is where Sara and I talk a lot about self-care. Like, we aren't taught self-care in nursing school. Like, and being able to advocate for ourselves and keep ourselves safe is also self-care. So again, they just need to integrate these things into nursing programs and talk about them, and then also get the experts in there who know best. Like, if it's security that knows best to come and do a couple days with us training, then we should do that. If it's police or EMS, then we should be working with them. I don't think we should be working and learning from people as like right on the job. I think we could do things differently and we can learn differently.
Absolutely. Now, I there's kind of a kind of a difficult question, but I'm going to ask it anyways. If you had the ability to go back in time and give yourself some advice when you were starting down this career path, knowing what you know now, what advice would you give yourself?
I would say to myself, don't doubt yourself so much, because what I have learned throughout my career as a nurse and even in my personal life is if something has happened to me and I'm upset about it, chances are it's happened to many other people and they're also upset about it. And it really just takes one person to speak up and kind of break the silence in order for change to happen. So I guess just in a really broad sense, that's what I would tell myself. Don't doubt yourself so much. Trust your gut. If something feels wrong, it probably is. And if you speak up, you're speaking up on behalf of X number of people that were afraid to speak up. So that's what I would say to myself. And if you see something happening that doesn't seem right, also speak up, because you're supporting that person. Being a bystander is also not okay. It's more passive, but it's also you're being complacent with what's happening. So I think that's probably what I would say to my younger self.
All right. I think I formulated something now. And I think it really goes in line very much with our personalities and kind of how we go about our podcast. And I think it is, don't be afraid to challenge the status quo. And your senior leaders aren't always right. They don't always have the right answers. And I think, coming into nursing and how the program is laid out, there's so much hierarchy, and it's not just nursing, but it's healthcare in general. And I think this hierarchical structural thinking is really negative, and it really actually, I don't want to say like makes you less intelligent, but it really puts people into boxes. And I feel like just because we are nurses doesn't mean that we can't be political activists, doesn't mean that we can't be social justice activists, doesn't mean that we can't be mental health advocates. It doesn't mean we have to be this one thing. And I think that it's kind of like the don't believe the hype. there's so much more to knowledge than what you're learning in that moment. And I think if I could have told myself anything, I would say go broad. So yes, take nursing on as maybe my sole undergrad, but learn about Indigenous rights, learn about Black history, learn about, some of the things that have happened over time in medicine. Take an arts class. Don't be so broad and put yourself in a bucket. Like, you are not just a nurse. You are more than that. You are all of the various different interactions, the different experiences that you've had. I think that's what I would have told my young self, to be like, you know what? You're going to be greater than just a nurse.
Awesome stuff. Now, we've mentioned the podcast. Can you talk to us about for one, Gritty Nurse Apparel? What's happening with that? And,
oh dear.
And can you talk to us about anything that we can expect from you guys in the future?
So Gritty Nurse Apparel was just our way to sort of, broaden the way that people can make a statement and advocate for what we believe in. So that's Gritty Nurse Apparel. What we have upcoming, though, is that we're really interested in speaking engagements. I think this is really where we can hit home. So whether we're speaking to a group of nursing students or healthcare professionals, or even people outside of healthcare that want to know what it's like, what some of the issues are that we're dealing with, I think that is for us the next natural progression in what we want to do. Because we've been doing the podcast for a while, I think we've been able to build an audience, people that are listening, and we kind of want to keep going that way, but just, reach a different group of people. So if we can speak to people and help them understand what it is to be a nurse, or even, what it is like to deal with a bully. So that's kind of a broader topic. I think it's just really using our experience and our voices and advocating for things that really matter to us. And I mean, there's so many different things that we could do, but that is really probably the next step. And who knows what else might be coming. Like, we've been in the media a lot, so we're open to all different opportunities.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a wild ride, Sarah, right? I mean, I think what's next? Like, if I could say like what's coming next just recently, like, I mean, I'm actually going to be on the agenda with Steve Packin on Monday evening. I'm going to be on a national panel talking about poverty and health and well-being as well. Oh my gosh. We're doing some appearances for CBC and with CTV coming up with W5. I think the long and short of this is the gritty nurses are not going anywhere. We're here to stay. We're here to continue to advocate, to continue to talk about things with grit and with passion, and to continue to elevate the voices of others. Like, I think, as much as we've had all these opportunities, again, we're happy to pass the mic to say, hey, if there's another nurse out there that wants to speak, we're happy to let them speak. And also just to continue to share others' experiences and to talk about these things, the things that people are afraid to talk about, that are important to talk about. We are going to talk about them. And we are truth seekers. We use evidence-based practice. We're not going anywhere. I think we're just getting started. It's only March. We've got so many more months ahead of us. So you know what? Like, we're ready to have these conversations and continue to bring the fire and the grit and all of the passion, because it means so much to us to do this work. And we're going to keep talking about these things. So sorry, we're not going away, and it's too bad. We're here to do the work that's free right now. It's all good, but we're here to do the work.
Awesome. Now, we've covered a lot during this discussion. Is there anything I haven't asked you yet that you would like to discuss?
No, just that, like, I think just understanding each other's roles is really important. So, I mean, I've been in a situation where I was part of an apprehension. So, a mother that gave birth that wasn't going to be going home with her baby, I remember having to call security. And I still remember the setup of the room so well. It was like an observation area that had two different exits. And we were worried that during the handover to the child protection worker, that the father was going to try and take the baby. So I remember the security guard just appearing at the door because we were afraid this might happen. So I think we talk a lot about mental health and debriefing and that sort of thing. And I'm not sure if security guards get this same sort of opportunity to debrief about all the potentially traumatic things that happen to you. But I think that's also important because we talk a lot about this in our podcast, but I'm actually not sure how it plays out in other departments. So that's something that I just want to touch upon, is that we are very cognizant of the fact that we deal in healthcare with a lot of traumatic situations, things that are, not very common in other professions, and kind of how we support each other. We are always advocating for mental health support. And I think that's also something I wanted to touch upon, is that it is very important that we address this. And, we want to be preventative in mental health approaches versus waiting for that crisis situation, waiting for it to turn into something that it shouldn't turn into. It's just being self-aware and being able to seek support and help when you need it.
Yeah, actually that's a good segue for kind of what I was thinking too. And I was going to say, if there's another piece that we could touch on is actually the mental health piece. And I'm not going to take too long. I'm going to try to keep this tight, but we have seen, and I'm not speaking specific to security, but we have seen many instances, whether it's in the media, whether it's through print, of patients who are suffering a mental health crisis being harmed, right? Like, I mean, this is a really important conversation to have. And I think, and this goes both ways. So like, it's so important for, not just police officers, security, whoever's going to be interacting with a mental health patient, that you really have a understanding. I'm not saying that, you need to become a mental health worker, but making sure that we have the right people to provide the right support at the right time. Because you know what? It's not always about a tackle or some nice words. Like if we don't have the right people in the right place at the right time to help mitigate some of these situations, we can see some really devastating things happen to people, and it's very serious. Like, I mean, there was a case where it was in the States of a gentleman who had a very severe mental health issue, and we hear it time and time again of them being killed or whatever the case may be. And it breaks my heart. It really does. And especially when we look at racialized groups and seeing the disparity when it comes to mental health crisis support and outreach, we have to talk about it, and we have to have a different approach, because at the end of the day, we need to keep ourselves safe, but we also need to protect people who have mental health concerns or issues. They are just as much as a person as we are here sitting today, and they're struggling. And when we see them that ill, we just need to make sure that we are dotting our I's, we are crossing our T's, we are making sure that we have all the right supports in place, that, you know, we have a really positive outcome. Because some of the stuff that I've seen over the last 2 years, I think it's not just me, it's shaking a lot of people to our core. So it's super important to make sure that everybody on board, everyone involved, has the right training, and we're making sure that we're keeping ourselves safe and we're keeping other people safe, especially when it comes to mental health crisis.
Excellent words. Now, as we wrap up, do you guys have a special message for the Healthcare Security Cast community?
Special message. Hi guys, we're here.
Listen to our
message.
podcast.
You know what? I think everyone has a role to play, and you know what? I'm glad that we're having this conversation, and maybe what we'll see is more collaboration through nursing with security, and vice versa. Like, I think there's a lot of great work that we can do together. Everyone has a role to play in the healthcare team. And you know what, it's not just that it starts today, but you know what, the fact that we're having this conversation, that you've reached out, I'm happy to have the conversation. I'm happy to be here.
Mm-hmm. And, you know, so much respect to healthcare workers, and especially security workers. I think you guys deal with a lot.
Yes, shout out to security. You guys deal with a lot.
I don't know if I could do it, and maybe you feel the same about nursing, but we all have our skills and our expertise, and I'm very thankful for what you do every day.
Absolutely. You keep us safe in more ways than one. It's not just about the physicality. There's a lot of stuff that you guys do that I think happens behind the scenes, and we don't know about them. So having a podcast that you guys are able to talk about some of the work that you do, it's really important. So good on you guys too.
Well, thank you so much for that. Now, the last thing I'll ask is just in terms of the podcast and just everything that you're doing. For anyone who wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
I think the easiest way to find us is to go to our website, grittynurse.com. But we're also, you know, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram, we're on Facebook. You can just Google us and find us that way. We're on all the different podcast platforms, so Apple, Google, Amazon, iHeartRadio. We also are on YouTube, so you can definitely find us that way, or you can email us at grittynurses@gmail.com.
I mean, I think probably Twitter is probably the most poppin'. If you really want to get us, you can hit us up on Twitter. But again, yeah, like our email, grittynurses@gmail.com. And then our website, you can find us that way. There's a contact us form there too. So we're happy to help. We're happy to continue having these powerful conversations.
Awesome stuff. Well, thank you so much for joining me on the Healthcare Security Cast. I appreciate it. I really enjoyed this conversation, and I think there's a lot of value for everybody who joined us today as well.
Thank you for having us. Woohoo!
Thanks.
The Healthcare Security Cast is available on Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music and Audible, and many other platforms as well. Check out our Linktree on your computer or mobile device. And this can be found at linktree/Brian Hamilton. That's linktr.ee/Brian, BRINE Hamilton. Again, that's linktr.ee/Brian Hamilton. Or if it's easier, send me a text at 647-372-2042. That's 647-372-2042. And I'll be happy to answer any questions you may have or share any links you may be looking for. Thanks again for listening. Until next time, take care and stay safe.